The Indian temple is conceived as a place for the self-transformation of the devotee. The Brihat Samhita, written in the early 6th century, describes the sanctum as the place for Brahman, the formless divine which pervades all that there is. Here in the Garbhagriha or womb chamber, the devotee is born again in the knowledge of the oneness of all creation. The temple illustrates the truth of the cosmos and explains it to the devotee, from the representation of the unmanifest eternal to the multitude of forms of the world. The central buttresses of the walls of the temple hold the images which represent an aspect of the deity in the sanctum. They make the deity who is deep inside visible on the outside. It is through these that the formless eternal is given a personality and made more approachable for the devotee. A mythical family is created, much like a human one. The temple walls abound in images of the abundance and fruitfulness of nature. This is the world of forms, the manifestation in numberless parts of the eternal truth of the Garbhagriha. Nagas, divine serpent kings, embody the protective forces and harmony of the world. Leogryphs rear upon the walls, awakening the courage within us to face the inner truth. Continuing the tradition of Yakshis of ancient times are celestial Apsaras and languorous Kanyas, beautiful women. In Indic philosophy, it is believed that the moment of the aesthetic response is akin to Brahmananda, or the final bliss of salvation itself. Our appreciation of beauty is a glimpse of the grace which underlies the world, the essence of divinity which is in all. The icons presented in the temple were developed in the religious texts called the Puranas, literally meaning ancient. The main deities of the Hindu faith are Shiva, Vishnu, and Shakti. Around them are woven stories which help to explain philosophic concepts to the devotee. From the 6th century AD till the 10th, the last caves to be made for the Buddhist, Hindu, and Jaina faiths were created at Ellora in Maharashtra. The grand climax of rock-cut architecture in India is in the 8th century Cave 16, the Kailashanatha temple. This is the largest and most magnificent excavation of the world. The entire hillside has been transformed into a great temple with structures carved both inside and out. At Shravanabelagola in Karnataka, in 983, a colossal statue of Bahubali, also known as Gomteshwara, was made. This is about 60 feet high and is the largest freestanding monolithic sculpture of the world. The early art of the Jainas was similar to that of the Buddhists. By now, the Jaina style had developed in a different direction. The depictions appear formal and stylized. They convey a spirit of extreme detachment from the material and sensual world. Meanwhile, from the 9th century onwards, beautiful temples were made under the Cholas in Tamil Nadu. The early Chola temples were not very large. The purpose was not to inspire awe through size and grandeur. It was to take us to the world of gentleness which can be found within us. Shiva dances on the demon of forgetfulness. In Indic belief, our ignorance is the forgetting of the truth, which can so easily be found again within us. In the year 10,010, Rajaraja Chola completed the tallest and largest temple which had been made in India. The Brihadishvara, dedicated to the great Lord Shiva, was made to express his own power and military might as much as the grandeur of the Lord. The figures made in later Chola temples are less naturalistic in their poses and expressions. The projection of grandeur and the scale of the temple appear to have overtaken the personal feeling and the importance of sculpture. There also developed a great tradition of Utsava Murtis, or festival images cast in bronze. The deity in many manifestations of human form comes out to the streets of the town and becomes approachable to all. The most magnificent image in the bronzes is the Nataraja, Shiva in his cosmic dance. In this dance, he creates and destroys the world. The richness of symbolic meaning in the Nataraja image makes it one of the greatest icons created by man. As Shiva clasps Parvati's hand as they are married, the onlooker relates to the divine through emotions which are so closely a part of his own life. In the land of Magadha, in the eastern plains of India, where the Buddha had preached, great centers of Buddhist study came up in the first millennium AD. The best-known Buddhist universities were Nalanda, Vikramshila and Odantapuri. At these centers of learning, the message of the Buddha and his many qualities of wisdom and compassion was studied in great detail. These qualities of Buddhahood were personified in a pantheon of deities which was created. By meditating upon the personified qualities, a worshipper was to awaken within himself the qualities presented. He was to become that deity. The earliest sculptures found at Nalanda date from the 6th and 7th centuries. Stucco figures of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas made here have sharper features than ever before. They convey an impression of the dynamic intellect on which the focus has gone at this time. In the high Himalayan mountains is the verdant valley of Kashmir. Here in the 10th century, Abhinavagupta had taken the Indian philosophy of aesthetics to rare heights of development. An elaborate brass image of the 9th century is a Buddha Vairochana. Lotus pedestals and the deities of Vajrayana Buddhism are first seen in Buddhist art in the caves of Western India from Kanheri in the 6th century onwards. It is in Kashmir that we see a great flowering of the Vajrayana philosophy and its art. In the meantime, in the 8th century, in the Himalayan foothills, a high ridge of sandstone was carved into a magnificent temple complex at Masroor. The sculptures are similar to those found of this period in the wooden temples of the nearby Chamba region. Chamba lies immediately south of the present state of Jammu and Kashmir. The early temples here are in the secluded valley of the river Ravi. The 8th century wooden temple of Lakshana Devi at Bharmor is richly carved, and it recalls the art of the Gupta tradition in the northern plains. However, there is a lilting grace and joyousness of the hills which pervades this work. The trans-Himalayan lands of Spiti, Kinnaur and Ladakh are a magical place. The tallest mountains of the world stand guard here. In the beginning of the 2nd millennium, Kashmiri artists were brought here to create a chain of monasteries and Buddhist temples. These were to lay the foundations of a lasting tradition of Buddhist art in the Trans-Himalayas. The Tabo monastery has clay sculptures of the 11th century. The assembly hall is an architectural mandala or graded path towards enlightenment. Mahavirochana represents supreme enlightenment. The deities around him emanate from his universal body and represent different aspects of him. This is similar to the developments of the Hindu temples of this time, where the truth at the center is reflected in the images on the body of the temple. The Ser Khang or Golden Temple at Lahalung is one of the most beautiful creations of the entire Trans-Himalayas. The walls have been transformed into a heavenly realm. The entrance to the Sumstek or 3-story temple of Alchi in Ladakh is delicately carved in the Kashmiri style. A special feature of the temples of Ladakh of this period are colossal clay figures of bodhisattvas which stand 2 stories high. At Khajuraho between the 10th and 12th centuries was created one of the most splendid temple cities in the history of the world. The temples here are made in the North Indian or Nagara style. The teeming figures that fill the walls of the Khajuraho temples are made in accented postures, active and turning in myriad directions, seen from all sides. These culminate the tendency towards the hardening of the facial features, elaboration of jewelry, and a greater sense of activity which had been developing in the previous period in Indian sculpture everywhere. The desires and forces of human love are depicted as part of life in the world. Here on the temple walls, the viewer sees them in their correct perspective as only a reflection, like all else is, of the great reality which is to be met in the sanctum. There is a profusion of Hindu deities which are made in the Jaina temples here. There are no barriers which separate the deities of the different streams of belief, all of which flow towards the same truth. In southern Karnataka, the Keshava temple, dedicated in 1117, is a classic example of the ornate style of temple art under the Hoysalas. The exterior of the temple is more profusely sculpted than ever before. The best-known sculptures here are of the Madanakais, female bracket figures. The profusely decorated temple of Hoysaleshwara at Halabid was also built in the 12th century. While every fingernail is carved, the breath of life which animates much of Indian sculpture has given way to profuse ornamentation. In the meantime, further northeast, the land of present-day Orissa witnessed prolific temple building from the 7th century onwards. Here, in the 10th and 11th centuries, we see subjects of the art which are very similar to those of this period at Khajuraho. In the 13th century, at Konarak in Orissa was made a grand temple dedicated to Surya, the sun. It was the tallest and most magnificent temple made in India. The climax of 800 years of building structural stone temples. The temple tower and the hall were conceived as a giant chariot of the sun. 24 large wheels, 12 on each side, representing the 12 months of the year, were made for the ratha or chariot. 7 horses pull it forward at a spirited gallop. The Sun Temple at Konarak represents the high point of monumentality and splendor in the tradition of temple building. It also celebrates the activities and life of the king, as never before in temples. Niches in the sanctum and in the hall were originally filled with many images of the king. The beginning of the 14th century saw considerable political disruption and repeated attacks of the Khalji and Tughlaq dynasties from the north. Out of the chaos rose a new and powerful kingdom named Vijayanagara, or City of Victory. In the 16th century, its capital at Hampi was described by Portuguese visitors to be like a second paradise, with no equal in the world then. In the palace complex is a massive stone basement, which is what remains of a large structure called the Mahanaumi Dibba. In reliefs made on the side of the Dibba, the king's great armies are shown, and so are hunters and dancers. Vijayanagara came into existence under darkening clouds of war. Its great armies remained most important, and this changed focus of attention is constantly visible in the art. Unlike the art of ancient times, the focus is here on life in the world, the here and now. The carvings are full of vigor and expression. Under the Cholas, temples had attained a grand scale. Now, imposing gateway towers which were much taller than those above the shrines were made. These were visible from afar and reflected imperial magnificence as well as the grandeur of the divine. The tendency towards a large scale and grandeur was carried further under the Nayakas. From the 16th century onwards, vast temples were made, some of them the size of small townships, such as the Vishnu temple at Srirangam. At the Meenakshi temple at Madurai, temple authorities estimate that there are 33 million sculptures in the temple complex. Even if that number is not based upon an actual count, the temple does convey such an impression. However, the emphasis in this period has shifted away from the importance of individual sculptures. Earlier, the temples were much smaller structures and the sculptures were most important. The devotee was to be moved and transported through his response to the beauty and grace of the art. In this period, sculptures are often repetitive and act as decorations of the grand structures. Earlier, the worshipper left the material world far behind to enter the simple, sanctified space of the divinity. In the great temple cities of South India, the revered space has expanded to clearly display the sacred nature of the universe. The search is still for the peace which can only be found within. However, the grandeur of the Lord is celebrated in all aspects of life.